All right, good morning. Guys, I'm sorry, I haven't done a video in a while, and I had planned on, dogs might come in and interrupt here. I have two dogs now, so you might meet, we know Frost. Sky might come on camera a little bit if Frost lets him. All right, anyways, I was planning on doing a video to recap last weekend on Monday. And then, kind of the news broke in the racing world. There was a lot going on. And I'm like, well, who's going to watch a video recapping Oaklawn Park when, we've kind of got this major breaking news and then major breaking news in the world. So doing a recap video kind of took a back seat. But with the Rebel Stakes yesterday and just kind of, I think it's good that we're still following horse racing while we can to talk about this race. And then if some people want to jump on chat and talk about horse racing in general or other things going on in the world, I think it's important to try to stay connected as we can, especially the racing community. I know Twitter's an outlet for a lot of people, and it's important to kind of keep that up. So anyways, wanted to do that with the video here. But yeah, let's talk about the Rebel Stakes yesterday. I'm going to kind of move some stuff around here while I'm getting set up and Frost out of the way, or he's going to hang out. All right, so let's pull up the Rebel Stakes as far as the grid. Close some tabs. All right. So it was kind of an interesting day at Oaklawn Park yesterday as far as the track conditions, because it came out wet. And I think we did see the track profile change in the kind of the last few races on the card. And that's important with looking at the Rebel Stakes. Nadal being the winner kind of benefit from that track profile. When I talk about that track profile, the inside lanes, especially in those later races, seem to be where you wanted to be on the racetrack. And that's where he was. It's not so much to where I think, it really carried him and he wouldn't have won without it, which is sort of the criteria that I want to see for racing, as far as like assessing whether there was a bias or not. But I do think it helped him. I think it helped the second place finisher, and I think it kind of played against some of the other horses in the race. Starting with Nadal, going into the race, and I know a couple people heard the podcast. I was on with the How to Bet podcast with Scott Shapiro, and kind of going into this race, I had talked about Nadal and sort of how I saw him as a racehorse and in terms of the trip, to where he looked to me like where he's a need the lead type. He's probably not going to want to race behind horses, and that's sort of what I'm going to take going forward. Is that sort of the trip that he wants. I thought it was a good effort, graded it a B+. I mean, if you're on the lead and you're with the profile, that's sort of how you want to win, show some fight at the end. So all that stuff is positive, but still, I'm not sold on him as far as being like, this is the horse to beat going into the Kentucky Derby, which is probably something we can talk about after this race, because to say it's going to be the first Saturday in May is probably wishful thinking, at least at this point. So I'll go through kind of horse by horse, and then I'm going to do this in sort of numerical order. I'll kind of line up with the results, actually, which is kind of interesting. But the number 2, Accession, going into this race, he hadn't really done enough for me in any of his races to be like, this is a horse that's going to be a serious contender in this race, and probably even a serious contender to hit the exacta, but underneath being a ceiling. He finished second, but I think he was benefit from the racetrack, both the profile and even probably the sloppy conditions, maybe moving him up a little bit, just sort of the way he kind of traveled and handled the racetrack. But being inside definitely helped. There was a little bit of traffic around the turn, but kind of overall, I'd say that the other positives kind of weighed out that little bit of trip there. Going forward, I mean, if he's able to continue that race, certainly, I mean, he's got enough foundation at this point to, is what you want, and he's running back on short rest, which is good. I mean, racehorses overall, if they're running back in under 30 days and maintaining their form, that's great. We can rarely see that, especially at this top level. So number 3, Basin, ended up finishing 3rd in the Rebel. He's coming off a decent layoff, 194 days. But for these horses, when they're juvenile, 3-year-old, that layoff is substantial. And he had some challenges coming into this race as far as being the layoff. and going 2 turns for the first time, even though he'd been proven over a sloppy track. We've talked about kind of even all sloppy tracks aren't the same. But I thought his effort, I kind of, I liked him in the spot. I think he had enough class. I think he had enough ability to compete here. And I wasn't turned off by the effort. Obviously, I'd like to see a little bit more, but I think under the conditions, I think he ran a fine race. He finished third, but he was in that blanket for those minor spots. Not the most ideal trip for him. He was on hold early. He had traffic in the first part of the race. Probably a little bit short, all things considered. I could see him move forward off this race, and definitely you need to see him move forward off this race, but not a discouraging effort going forward. If he kind of stacks up with the other horses wherever he ends up going next. Silver Prospector, a disappointing effort for him. And kind of, it sort of makes sense, when you're looking at form cycle and talking about this race going in, talking about it on the podcast and on the recap video, his visuals, he was sitting on that improved race when he ran. I'm kind of going to go backwards a little bit here, but when he ran in Smarty Jones, he had that troubled trip, and he showed run being against the profile, moving against the flow. So he had that upside potential, and then he got the perfect trip in the Southwest, and his visuals in there sort of falling apart late, drifting out after the perfect trip, sort of a sign that, distance could be a factor, but maybe, in hindsight, he was kind of over the top there. He was fully extended, and some regression coming back in 3 weeks, I think did play a factor yesterday. He just looked short. I mean, he was covered up. It wasn't the most ideal trip. There's some stress in there, but just kind of no kick and just sort of no finish. One of the slower races he's run outside of his kind of early turf races. So not the best effort from him in that spot with some recovery time. And again, distance being a question, could see a rebound, but those are 2 things I would keep in mind with him going forward. No parole. So no parole. He had been brilliant in his first 3 starts. I mean, no doubt about it. Super impressive, just crushing the state bred fields. That was a big test yesterday. He's going to have to face open. He's going to have to face a much tougher field. Did not step up to the challenge. I mean, some of that could be a factor of trip. He had been forwardly placed. There was kind of a scramble for the lead with Nadal getting pushed out to the front from the rail, and then American Theorem coming over, and where's the rider here? Talamo just deciding to kind of take back and rate. It's not the worst decision, but maybe not the best decision for a horse that's been doing everything on the front end. He didn't react well to that and just didn't show up on that front. So from that perspective, maybe he's just a need the lead type. Maybe he's, exposed at this class level. We're going to have to see. I mean, he has run, just kind of at this point, where does he belong is sort of the question. And I would say the same thing for 3 technique. He's in that blanket for 4th. I thought it was actually, all things considered, I mean, he had a lot going against him. I don't think this distance is ideal. The wide trip, not ideal over the racetrack. And he showed fight late. He's in that photo for show. So I think for him, he's got run. It's just a matter of like, where does he belong? Where does he fit? Scott asked, is he going to be one of those 1-turn type horses? And I'm kind of thinking at this point, maybe that's the case. So, we'll see if they go that route, and if he appreciates that, then that's where he will end up. I butchered this name on the podcast. I'm going to do it again. So we're going to 7 coach. Ron Flatter pointed out this is a famous coach of something, and I'm sorry for not knowing it. With all due respect to him, I'm going to go with the number 7 here. Another horse that with a wide trip and made a good outside move, and then kind of ran on. And for him, he's making his first start against winners. Tough spot in graded stakes company. I saw him going into the race as one of these kind of improving type. maybe not improving enough to where he's going to be like a major threat in this race, but wanted to see a good effort from him. And I think he put it in. He's still got to continue to move forward. That type of effort yesterday is not going to be enough to win these type of races, but there still seems, a horse that he doesn't look to have distance limitations. And if another step forward maybe can be a factor on this circuit. American Theorem, I gave him an outsider look in here. I thought at 15-1 he was worth a play, and I've still kind of no regrets on that front. I mean, when you see kind of value, you got to do it, win or lose. So that was the case there. Maybe just a little bit too keen, maybe with the tactics coming off the layoff, kind of getting sent out early and into a duel with Nadal being on the outer part of the track, that not being the most ideal. But I think just kind of overall being a little bit too fresh off the bench. And with a trip that's not his ideal. I don't think he wants to be dueling on the front end. So I think that's a race he could move forward from. I mean, the rider wrapped up late. So, we'll see kind of as far as, where he ends up going. Obviously has to show more, but I think there's upside off that trip. And certainly hope so, because his first two races were good, and you'd like to see a good horse continue to be a good horse. Well, let me jump over and see. Well, there's no chats. I'll kind of cover a couple of these races. Did I lose? Ooh, I thought I lost the stream there for a second. A couple of these other stakes races on the card. We'll flip over to race 9. Now, I talked about how the profile changed. Maybe we should go back a little bit further. Maybe we'll start it around maybe we'll go back to the first stakes race, and that kind of puts everything in context a little bit more. And a better way to do it is to kind of touch on these stakes races. So around the 7th race, things kind of changed a little bit. It wasn't as extreme as a profile. I mean, going into the nightcap, the two horses, both long shots that finished 1-2, they had some upside, so they figured, but they were certainly flattered by that profile. The horse that finished 3rd, number 12, wide throughout, finishing on those, he was probably ran the best race. I mean, take nothing away from those top two, but I think that the profile there. So these are all signs that you can kind of see something's changing a little bit in the track, and I think that happened. Well, we started to see it here in race 8. So Snapper Sinclair sent out to the front end. He was pressed by Pioneer Spirit. Those two ended up finishing 2nd and 3rd with the winner Night Ops. Now, Night Ops was able to save ground. He kind of had that pocket trip and then angled out around those two horses. It's a good effort for Night Ops, but again, got the right trip. And I think maybe even, I hesitate to say it right now. Maybe it's a little bit too premature, but to downgrade Snapper Sinclair and Pioneer Spirit. I mean, with the profile being what it was, and the pace scenario kind of a little bit slow early for Snapper Sinclair. I mean, for him to not hold, maybe that's a negative. For Pioneer Spirit, I could see maybe a little bit of downgrade on those horses. Perhaps the horse that took the worst of it was the favorite, Bank It. Go off as a favorite? No, he went off as the second choice. Pioneer Spirit for Diodoro. Maybe some trainer steam there as to why he was favored, but probably Bank It should have been favored in there, and did have trouble. I mean, he was sitting in traffic and then had to move. He got shuffled back and then had to come wide. Came on for run. It's going to come up 7th in there, but he was sort of in that blanket for the minors. So I think he's got upside off that race. I think he was against the profile. Stablemate Laughing Fox. This is kind of a mixed race. I mean, it was at first, when I first watched, I went back and rewatched a lot of these races this morning. I do that sometimes because I'm doing a lot of trip notes. So I have 3 tracks going at once, and sometimes I'm just maybe I'm just not seeing this the way that I want to see it. So I'll go back and review first thing in the morning and just, kind of confirm or totally draw a line through what I saw the first time. So watching the race live, I was kind of I flattened out late, and going back and watching it, I'm well, it was kind of a good effort because he had to run. He was wide throughout and had to make that move. And he did kind of flatten out late, but you know, all things considered, maybe that makes sense that he did. So you know, not a bad effort for him. He's kind of working his way back into form. Second start off the layoff, so good effort there. Bravazzo, you know, he runs the race that he ran. I thought he'd kind of get the trip that he needed in this spot. Not saying he didn't. No real excuse for him finishing fourth. I mean, a little bit wide. That wasn't ideal. Had a little bit of contact. I don't think it was anything of substance. Late lead change. He's just kind of one of those horses that what you see is what you get from him. And if it's good enough on that day, he can get the win. But otherwise, like, it's hard to really see a, you know, improve or regress. He's definitely finds that stays the same type category. Guess Sweet, I guess he's the only other horse I didn't mention here. Save ground, just kind of evenly for those minor spots. Maybe he's kind of more one turn. I mean, he can win around 2 turns, but maybe the mile is just sort of where he wants to be, and definitely in the right spot with the right pace scenario. So let's go on to race 9, stakes race for older fillies and mares. And this race was won on the front end by Serengeti Empress. Now, Emma projected to be one of the other speeds in here. She got restless right before the gates were open, kind of pushed those doors open, and as the doors open, reacted to that, hopping straight up in the air, losing Aramia. She's out of the race right from the start. So that I think that did help Serengeti Empress, because she's able to make that easy lead, get over to the inside, and then take nothing away from her. Big effort on the front end. You know, I think that's how you want to see a front runner race, right? Like, she's getting to the front, she's got the lone trip, and then it's just take no prisoners, like just run them off their feet. And that's exactly what she did. Wired the field, open lengths late. And even effort for those horses underneath. I mean, Street Band, she's chasing behind her, but closer to the pace than she wants to be. That's just not her ideal trip. And I think this is a dynamics. Race shape is so important, especially when you have these smaller fields. So looking at this field, right, you have 7 horse field when they're in the gate, right? So Emma, she's eliminated. So now we're down to a field of 6, and then Saracosa dropping out the back. So you kind of have this sort of tighter, not Saracosa, who am I talking about? And so that sometimes forces horses into positions that are not their ideal positions when they race, and then you can see some changes as they go from race to race. The example that comes to mind of one of those types of horses is Midnight Bisou. You can kind of see where the type of race shapes and the type of fields that she tends to prefer over others. And I think that was kind of the case. I know I'm kind of getting off track here. I'll bring it back around to Street Band, because I think racing a little bit closer to the pace kind of took her a little bit out of her preferred run style. And not really running her race. I mean, kind of an even effort for her, an even effort for the ground saving My Lady Curlin. Saracosa, a good run from her off the pace. I mean, wide and made up ground, finishing that blanket for the minors. No excuse really for Lady Apple. I think she's kind of overrated. She was overrated off that Houston win, where kind of everything sort of went the right way. But again, yeah, Serengeti Empress, big effort on the front end. We'll see, some upside with Street Band there. I think that's pretty much it. I'll try to do a recap video tomorrow. Maybe I'll stay on. I know there's some people watching, so I'm gonna sign off unless you guys chat want to ask some questions. Otherwise, I'm gonna let the stream go and recap tomorrow. Racing at Oaklawn Park and at Santa Anita. I checked the weather yesterday. It didn't look that great on either spot, but definitely worth kind of following up on that. All right. Rob, thank you for the recaps. Well, thank you for watching. I'm going to try to keep these up. Maybe I'll do some during the week. We'll see how it goes. Maybe doing some of the other stakes races. Again, and a little bit off topic on this. I'm skeptical of Derby being run on the first Saturday in May. Just being a realist. I mean, if we do end up running on the first Saturday in May, there's a lot of good things that are happening in the world for that to be the case. We've kind of had some racing events that's great for humanity, for the U.S. So let's hope that's the case. But realistically, I'm kind of thinking that's going to get pushed back. So we'll see, because a lot of these horses, I mean, they're athletes, right? We've seen a lot of these athletes, like they come into these big events and these big seasons, and they're peaking. They've been training. They had to stay on the calendar. You guys know, like, my background is exercise science. I've worked with a lot of athletes, a lot of training up to events, certain things that are done in a way to where you're going to be at your best on that day. And so if that changes the calendar, you're going to see a lot of things shift around. And especially if we've seen with these horses. I mean, a lot of these horses, like, they drop off after the Derby. So we're going to see this picture could totally change by the time the race is coming around. I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but also just the way that I think naturally, I can't help but go there. So yeah, it'll be interesting how we go. So I'll definitely keep up with the recaps, keep following along. With horse racing being the only game in town. Hopefully people follow, share the stream. I wrote up a couple races today over at Brisnet. I'll tweet out that link and put it in the description here. And then over at Optics, always race of the day for Santa Anita. Chris has been kind of filling in, jumping over those gaps. And then also make sure that you follow, because we have done a race recap a handicapping preview for all the Kentucky Derby preps. And so those are up there. They're free. Just make sure that you register, no charge for that. Register, log in, read those recaps before the race, after the race, add your own opinions, shoot us a message like, hey, did you see this? Or I think that. That's one of the fun things about this, especially if we're all exercising precaution and not going outside if it's unless it's super necessary, those types of things to communicate online and use those resources. Let's take advantage of them to the fullest. So I'll end on that. Appreciate you guys for watching the recaps, and good luck today, and I'll follow up with the video tomorrow.